Hello, my name is Max, and there's a problem with these little pocket notebooks that I love so much. The covers are weak. This problem exists by design. They're manufactured to be flexible and disposable. They need to be able to slip into your pocket unnoticed and bend to the curves of your body. And they won't last forever since they have fewer than 50 pages. So using rugged materials would just lead to more waste. But we're not big companies making millions of books for unknown customers. We're making personal notebooks for ourselves. It's like a little present to you. From you. We want custom, we want premium, we want less waste. Let's make a better notebook. I don't know what I'm doing, but I have an idea. My first thought is to make a resilient and reusable notebook cover. Here's what I'm thinking. We make the covers with a thin and flexible core, then bind them together with something like cloth or leather, and then we use wire, string, or some other mechanism that can hold the pre-bound reams of paper inside. The inside of the cover also needs to be smooth enough that we can write on the last page and not have any trouble with bumps. I might try adding a pen loop somewhere on here, but from my experience, it gets more in the way than I like. If we do it right, we can just slot in our homemade notebook sheet stack things whenever we need to, and the cover will last a long time. Speaking of lasting a long time, get subscribed and click the bell icon so you don't miss any upcoming videos. We'll see how things go, but I might make a few different versions with different materials to see how they hold up. Let's get to work. First, I'm going to make an insert of notebook sheets to make sure that everything fits. I'm going to fast forward through this, but if you want to watch it in greater detail, click on the card in the top right corner. Alright, now that that's done, let's go to the garage workbench and see what we can scrounge up for materials. Alright, this is a bit of a mess. Let me just clean it up real quick. Here I have everything that I've been able to scrounge up out of my garage here, sorted by what I think the type of material that it is. So over here on the left, I've got core binding stuff that I might be using for the core of the notebook. In the middle, I've got all of the things that I want to use to help hold the sheets in place. And then over here on the right are all of these kind of soft materials that will hold everything together. Here's our little pre-made ream of paper, and I'm going to get started with the notebook that I want to make for myself. I don't know how well it's going to go, so I figure I'll start with the most optimal materials that I kind of think would be optimal, and then, maybe I can experiment with other things from there. Obviously, some of these things are not what everyone will have in their house, like aluminum flashing or leather, like a big swatch of leather, but, most people should have some kind of like old shopping bag or canvas bag, old pair of pants, something like that, bits of wire, twisty ties, things like that. But if you wanted to go with something a little bit smaller, you could also use old membership cards or gift cards, and then just use those as kind of the core of your cover. However, since I'm going to be using this 3x5, it doesn't quite match up, so I'm going to use some other material that I've got here. I started by cutting a soda can to use its aluminum. I think it could work as a cover, but I would have needed 2 cans worth of material to find out. I don't have 2 cans, so I moved on to the aluminum flashing. I wasn't convinced it would work, but I measured and cut it with the blind confidence of a derailed train racing down a mountain. I trimmed the edges and bisected it. You'll notice here that I also hit it with a rubber mallet, which I did several times throughout this process. It did not help in any way. Moving on, I sanded down the sharper edges so they wouldn't cut or puncture the softer cover material. I clamped the notebook slug between the flashing and used leftover handlebar tape to keep it in place. While using tape helped align everything, I'd use a less expensive tape in the future. I then sanded the flashing to help with the gluing later on. I measured the cover, added a couple of inches to the results, and cut some canvas from a leftover shopping bag. I didn't think to double check. Even now, as I'm watching this, I can tell it's not going to fit, and I can't believe I didn't notice it earlier. When I laid the core on the smaller pieces of canvas, I could tell something was wrong. Okay. And immediately it's too small. That's fine. With my lesson learned, I decided to cut the piece of canvas again, assuming I knew better. This left me with 2 pieces of canvas that were too small and which I couldn't reuse later for the inside of the notebook. Clearly, this was the fabric's fault, so I tossed it aside and tried the leather. I measured a couple of times and gave myself plenty of extra room to make sure it would fit. I laid it out with the core and trimmed some excess leather from around the corners. By the way, if you like the music, you can find all the details in the description. I applied a layer of superglue in crisscrossing patterns where I'd sanded earlier. I pressed and held the leather for at least 30 seconds, then hit it again with a hammer. I really can't explain why I did this. Now, I was ready to begin pulling the leather over the corners. I started by sanding each corner, applying a little glue, then pulling the leather tight and pressing it down for 30 seconds. Rinse and repeat 3 more times for the other corners. I took an old copper wire, laid it flat against the tape, and cut holes in the leather at the top and bottom where it would come out. My plan was to fold the wire later to hold the slug of notebook paper. I also noticed the leather at the corners was loose, so I trimmed and glued a little more. Next, I sanded, glued, pulled, and pressed the leather on each edge, continuing to trim corners as I went. I used a board to curve the copper exactly where I wanted it, then finished the hook using needle nose pliers. The slug fit a little too tightly, so I moved the bends further away from the center to make more room. This is where I discovered that I shouldn't have cut the canvas from earlier a second time. For the inner cover, I wanted one piece of contiguous fabric across the middle to cover the copper wire. I took more measurements, then got out the old canvas bag again, and made my cuts. To keep the edges from fraying, I folded the fabric and glued it to the cover with the cut edge down, like when hemming a shirt. I did this all the way around, then glued inside the corners and tucked in the edges. As I'm editing this, I realized that I could have made a smoother writing area by first gluing the canvas to pieces of cardstock, then gluing that to the cover. Right now, the fabric is a bit loose in the middle, which is acceptable for my purposes, but this idea would be worth exploring in a future build. And here we have it. Is it perfect? Yes. I find it aesthetically pleasing and discover myself drawn to it, wanting to hold it, to open it. My precious. I love that I can easily replace these paper slugs, and the protective cover will patina and wear over time. It's got copper, leather, canvas. It feels nice to hold. I'll never need another one for as long as it stays together. What's not to like? I probably should have made the covers a little wider to reduce the amount of paper trimming needed. It was the same for the first video, and it's the same here. I'm sure there's a lesson to be learned, but I'm sure I'll figure it out next time. And like I mentioned in the voiceover, wrapping the canvas around something before gluing it into place might have left me with a smoother writing surface. But overall, I'm delighted with the result and look forward to using it. If you're delighted, like this video or leave a comment. I'm sure you could use the social interaction. If you want to see more content like this, I upload new videos every Thursday, so get subscribed and click the bell icon to be notified. You can find music credits, various product links, and other shenanigans in the description below. That's all I've got for you today. Thank you all for joining. Goodbye! I am recording, right? Oh, now I am. Motherfucker.